Hey friends, welcome to my channel. So I'm going to do a little updated version of how to make sourdough bread, and we'll do it step by step. So the first step in the process would be feeding your starter. So when you get your starter from me, you will have 100 grams in a jar like this. And because it has been traveling, especially if it's during the warmer months, you're gonna want to feed this right away when you get it, because it's going to be very hungry, and you want to keep it well fed so that it makes a really good sourdough. So when you get it, try first thing to feed it, because if you put it in the fridge, then you might need to feed it a few times just to get it to come back a little bit. Same thing if you go on vacation and say you haven't fed it in a few weeks. It might take a couple feedings for it to come back to be at full activation. Okay, so a couple of things that I recommend getting. I like to use this weck jar I got from Amazon. I can post a link to that below. I just really like how large this jar is and how it has a very wide mouth. It just makes it easier for making sourdough. And if you really like to bake, and if you like to bake, let's say more than one loaf at a time, you're going to have more than 100 grams. And especially if you feed it more, you're gonna have more you're gonna have more flour, you're gonna have more sourdough starter. So this one probably has about like 200 grams in it. And then it's gonna double. So you could easily overflow a smaller jar like this. You could still definitely do it in a jar like this. Bella, move. She likes to be on YouTube, I guess. Okay, so recommend a wet jar. I highly recommend getting a scale. In the past, when I was learning how to make sourdough, I was using just measuring cups, and I just didn't have really good results. I also got this on Amazon. So yeah, that's a must. I now use the Einkorn flour. Sometimes I use the all-purpose. Sometimes I put in the whole wheat. The whole wheat can be a little more difficult to find. And if you're ever having trouble with your starter getting really bubbly and active, it's really good to feed it with rye flour. You can use all rye flour, or you can mix it up and use some of this flour, the Einkorn, and then some of the rye flour. Rye flour is just really good at feeding the sourdough culture. So sometimes I will do that, but for the most part, I really just like using the Einkorn because it is lower in gluten. It's easier to digest. It's actually imported from Italy, and when we are over there, we are able to eat bread and wheat and things much better. Like here in America, things are sprayed with the glyphosate and the pesticides, and it just leaves a lot of inflammation in the body. So since then, I have switched over to using just strictly Einkorn. Okay, so let's get started. So you're going to want to turn your scale on here. You're going to place your starter on, and then you're going to want to tare it so that it says 0. And then what I will do is I will just put in, because we have 100 grams of flour in here, we're going to put in another 100 grams of flour. And if it's okay if you go a little bit over. I would say a little more is better than less. Making a mess here. So then as you get going and it starts to double, let's say for the next time, You're not obviously not gonna have 100 grams. You're gonna have more than 100 grams of starter. And so let's say you have 200 grams of starter. Well, then you're gonna wanna feed it with 200 grams of flour and 200 grams of water. So it's always important to know how much starter is in your jar before you start feeding it. Okay, so we're at 100 grams of flour. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna tare it again until it's at 0. And then we're just gonna take some purified water and we're gonna pour it in until we get to 100 grams. Perfect. And then we'll just take a knife and we'll just mix it up so that everything is well mixed. Sometimes clumps can hide in the bottom, so just make sure you give it a good stirring all the way to the bottom. Okay, great. So we fed our starter, and then it's gonna take approximately 5 to 7 hours for this to become active. So what you're gonna wanna do is set this in a warm place, uncovered, for 5 to 7 hours. Anytime you are feeding your starter, you always want it out and you want it uncovered. Anytime that you are not feeding it, you want it covered and in your fridge. Okay. So a couple of things to consider is the climate that you live in. So we are in Florida, so it is always humid here, and it is also pretty warm. We keep our house around 76, 77 degrees. So our house is not super cold. So if your house is colder, if you live in a drier climate, I took my starter back up north with me in the fall months when it was cooler and a lot drier, and was making sourdough up there. And I noticed that it took a lot longer for my sourdough to rise. So you kind of have to just keep an eye on your sourdough starter. It will tell you when it's ready. It'll double and it'll have lots of good bubbles. So you might want to put it in a warmer place. In the winter time, if it gets really chilly here, then I will put it in the oven. So I'll just stick this in the oven and I will turn the oven light on just to give it that extra warmth. So that's something that you can do as well. Just remember that it's in your oven. So those are a couple of things to consider. So 5 to 7 hours, give or take, depending on how cool it is. So you might find that things are different. Your sourdough goes either more quickly or slower depending on the summer months or the winter months. Okay, so then I'm just gonna sit this out because it's a good temperature in our house. I'll just set it out on the counter, and then in about 5 to 7 hours, I will check back and see how it's going. And then I will start the process of making the sourdough. So it is about 120 here. I usually like to make sourdough at that time because of the process of making sourdough. It is a 2-day process. So let's say 6 hours from now, it'll be about 7 o'clock. At that point, the sourdough will be at its most active point, and then I can start making the bread. And then I will fold the 3 times, put it in the oven, and it will set overnight for about 10 to 12 hours. That's how long it takes here. And in the morning, I will proof and then bake. So that's kind of like the baking schedule that I found works for me. If I do it any earlier in the day, then I have to wake up earlier tomorrow. Or if I were to feed it at 6 o'clock at night, then I would be up pretty late in the night folding and such. So that's why I really like this schedule. Another thing to, there was something else I was going to say. It'll probably come to me in the second video. So anyways, 5 to 7 hours. Oh yes, I remember. So if it's already past its peak, it's probably not good to, it's not gonna rise as much as you like, and you won't get a very good sourdough. So really like timing that 5 to 7 hour mark, making sure that you're gonna be home and you're not out running somewhere. Just knowing that you're making sourdough, this is the day. Just kind of planning around your schedule. If you know that you have things going on that evening, it's probably not a good day to make sourdough. Okay, so we're gonna let that set, and then 5 to 7 hours we'll be back for step number 2, and that will be making the bread.